So the federal government is proposing to reduce the default speed limits across Australia, and in this video I'm going to explain what that proposal is and analyse a few of the points they're trying to make. So let's start off with what's actually being proposed, and there is such a thing as a default speed limit. If a road is not signposted for a specific limit, then it defaults to a limit, and there's two limits. There's a built-up area limit and there is a non-built-up area limit, and that's defined there. Essentially it's urban and rural is what it boils down to. Now the proposal is to lower only the build-up default limits for sealed roads down to 90, 80 or as low as 70 kilometers an hour, and unsealed roads straight to 80 or 70. Now, to be really clear, this does not affect roads with existing signposted limits. It's only for roads which do not have a signposted limit and are therefore the default. And all of the excerpts you're going to see here, including this one which explains built up and non-built up, are from the RIA, or the Regulatory Impact Analysis, and I've put a link here and I'll put a link in the description as well. So here's some examples of roads from the RIA. That is one which has a default speed limit, so that would be 100 k's an hour because that's sealed, and this one in WA would have also a limit of 100 k's an hour because it's unsealed. So the proposal is that might go to 80 or 70, and this one goes down potentially as low as 70. So why change? What is the impetus behind this? Well, there's a number of reasons. The third one is to reduce FSI, or fatal or serious injury, something I think we can definitely all get behind. Saving the cost of crashes. Every time there's a crash, there's a massive cost to society. Reduce emissions because vehicles travel slower, they will use less fuel. Reduced noise and reduced road maintenance costs. So all good aims I think everyone can get behind, and they're listed in the RIA. So how did this actually come about? Well, back in May 2021, all of the governments, federal and state, got together and said, okay, we're going to reduce FSI by 50% and then 30% and then down to zero by 2050. That is their goal. Okay, great. I think we can all get behind an FSI reduction. So what did they look at? They looked at reducing open road default speed limits. Okay, that should be on the table. However, very clearly the RIA says the RIA focuses solely on options that relate to default speed limits outside built-up areas and are within the remit of the Australian government. So the only thing they considered was default speed limits, and I think that's a bit of a problem. Okay, now here's the concept behind road safety. It's called the safe system approach in Australia. And the principle, and I've written it here from the RIA again, is that road users will make errors. Therefore, we make roads so safe that there is no fatal or serious injury. In other words, you build roads so safe even the worst drivers will never crash, or certainly not crash, but certainly have some form of FSI event. That's the basic principle. However, that ignores something called risk compensation, and it also ignores the potential to make the drivers safer, not just the roads. So let's take a look at what risk compensation is. It's a fairly well established theory. So I think that diagram which I found from Andy Singer explains it. If you're in a very safe car, you're going to take more risks. You can tailgate people, you can drive faster, and it's been proven when ABS came in, people said, hey, hang on, if I slam the brakes on, the car's just going to stop, I don't really need much skill. So they started to tailgate and they started to take more risks. It's what people do. And there's something called the Antilock spike, which isn't listed here, but that's essentially what it is. And a famous famous engineer said, how safe would cars be if every driver had this massive spike pointing at their forehead so that they knew in the event of a crash they would die? People would take fewer risks, everyone would be safer. And that's a fair point, but when you do crash, it will kill you. So there actually is this sort of risk compensation problem where you make things safer and people take other risks to compensate. Now, here's an example. I was on this road with a learner driver I was teaching. We were doing 80 because it's an 80 limit, and the learner said, why is everyone doing 100? Well, the answer is because it looks like a 100 k an hour road. That's why. It's wide, it was dry, just conditions just like these, and people were zipping by us at 100, getting impatient because we were doing 80, which was the limit. Now, if we contrast this road, and I know both of these roads quite well, this one is signed 100, but people tend not to do 100 on it because they go, yeah, okay, that's quite narrow, the visibility is not so good, I'm going to button the speed off a bit, so people don't tend to do 100. So everyone's got this kind of built-in risk compensation, regardless of what the speed limits actually are. Now, here's the thing, the road toll is actually climbing. So this is national fatalities 2000 to 2024. You can see this nice reduction here. Now, of course, this is COVID as well, but here's the interesting thing. Look at this little uptick here. What is causing that? Nobody knows. The report doesn't know, I don't know, I couldn't find anything. And it's consistent across many different countries, as you can read here. So what we do know is that the speed limits haven't changed. So we have this uptick. The speed limits haven't changed, so why are we considering changing the speed limits when they're clearly not the cause of this uptick here? If you can answer that, please put the response in the comments. Now, the data for the speed limit change actually isn't there, and the RIA admits this. Again, you can read this text here, but they say they don't have the data to properly assess. Also, say it's not clear what proportion of fatal and speed injuries there were on default speed limits roads versus ones which are already signposted. And at the end, it literally says, does not provide a definitive conclusion. So with that limited data, I don't know if I'd be pressing ahead with any policy options. It seems a rather shaky foundation to me. So what FSI factors are there other than speed? And the report does list a few. Distracted driving. Clearly that's a problem, increasingly so because social media companies have got teams of psychologists whose job it is to sit there and keep you scrolling and essentially trip that little dopamine thing in your brain every time you see those dots come up, etc, etc. So distracted driving is a problem. Vehicle condition is also mentioned. This is not me, this is in the report. Road conditions, well, clearly, and younger drivers, which is kind of surprising because we do have graduated licensing systems in, and that's the 120 hours in Victoria. Of course, it's not consistent throughout the state, so it's 100 hours here, 110 there, it's probably 107.5 in some other territory I haven't looked at, but the concept is we've got the same thing, right? And then seat belts and helmets. Obviously as well. Interestingly, with helmets, it has been shown that some drivers treat cyclists with helmets differently from those who don't wear helmets, and there's your risk compensation again. Now, all of those points over here, these factors may be more important than speed, alcohol or fatigue combined, so probably worth looking at some of them. Now, what's missing from this list? Can you guess? Yes, driver skill. For some reason, driver skill is never, ever looked at when it comes to road safety. You heard the road safety principle, which is you build a better idiot, we'll build a safer road, and we get this arms race because, remember, risk compensation theory means that it's kind of hard to win that if people are just going to take more and more risks the safer it goes, right? But yeah, driver skill never mentioned, which is why it's outside of this little blue box I put there. Now, there are two non-speed FSI factors worth taking a look at. Alcohol, 12%, according to the report, again, I'm not making this stuff up, involve alcohol, so maybe that would be a good place to look. And fatigues, now there's different versions of fatigue, but in Victoria, 16 to 20% of crashes involve fatigue. So we take that, and now it could well be someone was tired, and alcohol, we don't know, but pretty sizable numbers to work on, I would suggest. Now, I've got some questions about these. I'm going to call them remote roads, but it's really roads in non-built up areas. So 66% of fatalities outside of cities, apparently, and 85% on roads above 80 kilometres an hour. So that sounds like a terrible statement, but let's actually drill into it a bit. The first thing is, what percentage of roads in rural areas are not 80 or 100 or greater? I would suggest probably very few. It's not like you can drive for kilometre after kilometre in urban areas and never get above 70. So by definition, pretty much any crash is going to occur on a high-speed road. So there's that. What is the average time of first responder attendance? Clearly, if you're lying there bleeding to death, the quicker the paramedics get to you, the better, and they're probably likelier to get to you quickly, or some form of assistance be rendered in urban areas. And certainly I've never in an urban area been first on the scene to an accident, whereas in rural areas I certainly have been, and it's taken quite a while for the paramedics to arrive. This is no criticism of the emergency services at all. It's simply just a matter of distance and how many we can afford to put in a different place. What types of vehicle are being driven? Now, if you look around Melbourne, which a lot of very safe, modern, relatively modern SUVs or any other city like that. Out in the Styx, you're more likely to be towing, you're more likely to be towing a tractor, some form of ancient 79 Series U or Hilux or something of that nature. The type of vehicles need to be a consideration as well. And then what is the average distance of the journey as well? Maybe we should look at FSI per kilometre travelled, or maybe hour travelled, as opposed to just per population. Speaking of which, what is the percentage of FSI, not to per 100,000 people, but to people who ride in cars and passengers? Because in the city, there's a great many people who don't own a car, don't have a driving licence, or if they do have a driving licence, rarely drive and take public transport anywhere. Whereas in rural areas, pretty much everybody who is of driving age is able to drive and does drive. So going off FSI per 100,000, I don't think that's an accurate assessment. I think that should be more like per hour driven, per kilometre driven, against license. I mean, the statistician should be able to come up with this stuff and explain how all of this stuff works. So here's a bald stat, and as with most bald stats without caveats, it's worth taking a look at them in more detail. So you are 11 times more likely to be killed on a regional or remote road than in the city. Now, I've just explained why the stats per 100,000 head of population probably not appropriate, but why don't we look at traffic lights? We could say the risk of being killed at a traffic light is maybe, I don't know, 10, 15, 5, 20 times more in an urban area than in a rural area. Why is that? Because there's a heap of traffic lights in the city and there's kind of very few out in rural areas. Similarly, out in rural areas, everybody drives because you kind of have to. There aren't many trains or buses and everyone tends to use vehicles. That's what happens out there. In the city, not so much. So again, it's that comparison. So here's the question: do speed limit reductions actually work for FSI? And the answer is yes, they do. There is a lot of evidence, as you can see here, but what's not explored is the downsides to it. And also, how far do you go? Because you could quite conceivably argue that instead of doing 100 k's an hour on rural roads, we should do 90 because that's safer. Then you can argue 70, 60, and you can argue yourself all the way down to 30 kilometres an hour, which is a number where pedestrians tend to survive in proper cars. And then you can say, well, maybe trucks should do 20 k's an hour. And we can get to, you can continue this ad infinitum to the point of absurdity. Where is the point where we are comfortable with it? Maybe that's 70, maybe I'm wrong, I don't know. What do you guys think? But yes, they do reduce FSI, but there are downsides. You often hear speed the largest factor, and it kind of is, but that's like saying aircraft hitting the ground is the largest factor of aviation disasters. It's kind of inherent in what we do. I mean, if you are driving a car on the road, there is speed. And to say it is the largest factor is kind of nonsensical. So, you know, if every aircraft just flew 5 metres above the ground, we would be safer, but we kind of don't do that. We take the risk, we mitigate as best as we can. I'd argue that inappropriate speed is actually the problem, not speed per se. So let's have a look at some data internationally, again from the report. And here is Australia, and here is the median. This is 32 OECD countries for fatalities per 100,000 head of population. Now you can see here that all of these European countries have speed limits of 130, 120 k's an hour, plus 130. Good old Germany down here, in some sections on the Autobahn, doesn't have a speed limit. So that's interesting. So that would suggest that maybe speed is not the sole factor. It is definitely a factor, but why are these countries with higher speed limits doing better than us on FSI? This is the sort of thing we need to understand and explore. What are they doing better? Do they have a different culture from us? Do they do driver training better? I don't know. And also, why is the US so bad? Yeah, it's really terrible. 12, and everyone else is down here. What is it about the USA that has such a high rate of FSI? We need to understand all these factors and see how they apply to Australia, because none of these countries are Australia. So we've got to figure out what that data is and apply it to us, and that's not happening in this report. Now, there is a big con to speed limit reduction, and that is travel time, but it actually manifests itself in a few ways. The first one is obviously fatigue. The longer you drive and the more boring the drive, then the more likely you are to suffer fatigue, and fatigue, as we've seen, is a pretty big killer. Now, I like what is termed a eustress kind of drive. You've heard of distress. Well, that's when you've got so much going on that you're just overloaded. And you've also got understress, which is when you're so bored, nothing's happening. And eustress is when there's just the right amount of stress for you to perform. And for me, that's things like a dirt road where I don't have to concentrate too hard, but I have to concentrate a bit. And I actually feel often more refreshed driving along roads like that than I do when I'm just sitting on the Hume Highway 110, just getting absolutely bored. And if I was having to do that on a road which should be 100 and it's 70, well, you know, that's when distraction's gonna creep in. And if you're going to veer off the road and hit a tree, you're going to hit a tree. The second one is commercial costs. Now, trucks are what deliver things in Australia, and if they take longer to get from A to B, then things are going to take longer, and that can have real problems for spoilage and things like that as well, and also just speed and just-in-time delivery. And we've got to really explore these commercial ramifications. It's a big problem. And even people who send workers out, if they can get somewhere in 2 hours, do a job, come back, that's them done for the day. But if it takes them 2.5, maybe 3 hours, whatever else, well, they might have to overnight, and then that's an extra cost passed on to whoever's paying for that, etc. You see, it's complex. Modelling not really being done. It has been done a bit, but not to the extent it should have been. And then inclination to take a trip. I mean, I know I can get from where I am now to Mount Gambier in a certain amount of time. I'm pretty sure a lot of those roads are actually default speed limited. So instead of me just leaving Melbourne on a Friday night and just heading down there, maybe I think, oh, I can't really do it. I'll have to sort of split the trip, etc. I'm less likely to take that trip, and therefore there's an economic impact because of all of that as well. There's probably more. I haven't done the analysis, and neither have the authors of the report. Unsealed roads. Now here's an interesting thought experiment. I really want to see what you think of this. Would lower limits actually increase crashes? Now, if we look at this road here, I took this photograph in Cape York. This particular bit of the road is probably safe for 70, 80, 90 k's an hour. It's flat, there's no bumps, it's great. But if we look at what's coming up, this part over here, that is a washout, and you want to be slowing right down to about 40, 50 k's an hour for that, because if you don't, you're going to have a problem with your suspension and possibly fly off the bush. Now, if the speed limit was 100, I think most people would go, yeah, okay, that's clearly a maximum. I'm going to have to go below that at some point. But if you start to say that's 70, then someone inexperienced might go, well, okay, 70 is the limit. I will just drive at 70 everywhere, because on bitumen roads, that's kind of what you can do. On dirt roads, you have to sort of slow down, even on the straights, because the road changes, and that's an education thing. So unsealed roads have this massive, what I call safe speed variation, which actually varies on straights, not just on corners. So I think that could be a problem if we start to artificially lower these limits. Now, here's another question. There's a 200 series. Should it have the same limit as a Camry on a dirt road? Now, for any given type of car, you take a sports car versus a four-wheel drive on a road, arguably the sports car is better able to handle higher speeds, so maybe that should have a higher limit. But the variations between types of car on bitumen roads are not super great. On a dirt road, they are massive. So the 200 series is going to be well within its capabilities, and the Camry could be at the limit of its capabilities, or even beyond it. And again, when you start to lower the limits, people tend to drive up to them more, as opposed to figure out, okay, the limit's up there, I'll work out my own thing. And we see this in Europe. You travel in Europe, the speed limit might be 130 k's an hour, but not everyone is doing 130 k's an hour. Some people are doing 140, and that's okay. Other people are doing 110, 120, because that's what they feel safe as. When you have a high limit, not everyone necessarily drives to that limit, but when you have a lower limit, everyone's going to bunch up, and also it makes overtaking difficult as well. So let's take a look at some potential non-speed solutions then. The first one, and I thought of these, not the report authors, is signpost critical parts of critical roads. We should know where the most dangerous parts of roads in Australia are. So let's signpost those critical parts and say, hey, slow down for this bit, put a big red sign up and make it sure it's a real, actual dangerous bit, because then people go, yeah, okay, I'm going to pay attention to that. If you just put them everywhere, you get the cry wolf problem. Second one is, we know, and the report states, fatigue, alcohol, distraction, massive contributors to FSI. But if we focus on them and reduce them, there is no downside. There is a downside to reducing speed limits. There isn't a downside if people don't drive fatigue, don't drive distraction and alcohol. So why don't we focus on them? There's big gains to be made. Get ANCAP focused on usability. As someone who does a lot of road testing of cars, I can tell you the modern car is a nightmare. I have driven more modern cars than the average person by a factor of a zillion, and I get into them and I can't figure out where things are at. And sometimes things are like demisters are buried 2 menus deep. This should be illegal. ANCAP should be, the government should be fining these people and forcing the manufacturers to redesign these vehicles so that they're safe and usable. So that would help as well. And here's the big one, driver education. Fix the driver. If you've got a better driver, then all of a sudden all the roads become safer in all conditions, no matter what the limit. And specifically, I'm talking about observation, risk, identification of hazards, driving to the car you have and the conditions. I'm not talking about car control cones. And in fact, my observation, the more cones there are on an advanced driving course, the less useful it is for on-road safety. And yeah, attack me in the comments over that one. So my conclusion is the aim of reducing FSI, we all want to get behind it. Nobody wants their loved ones killed on the road. 100% behind that. And speed limit reductions should be on the table. They are part of the policy. But it is unacceptable to me that no solution other than speed limits have been explored. It's completely ridiculous and unacceptable. And the report admits that the data is incomplete and inconclusive. So why is it even being proposed in the first place? The downsides of reduction are not fully explored either. And we need a list of the roads affected so we can see how much of a problem this is going to be. Is it going to add half an hour to my trip to Mount Gambier or not? I don't know. I'm not going to look at every single road. I mean, I need to know the dimension of this problem. It's not listed. So in my view, this proposal as it is should not be supported, and I urge you to reject it using the link which I have in the description, or if not, tell me why not. Maybe if I'm convinced otherwise, I'll make a video going, yeah, this is a great idea. I'm open to ideas here. But on the evidence I see, this is not a good idea, and I don't think the government should do it.